All
Great.
good.
Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Chris Shang, and today we have Mark Ackers, who is co-founder and head of sales of MySalesCoach. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, tell us a little bit about MySalesCoach, what kind of companies you guys work with, and then we'll jump right into your story.
Absolutely. Yeah. So our ideal customer profile, we're working with sales leaders, typically in the tech or SaaS industry. They've got SDRs, BDRs, AEs, customer success, etc. Here's the problem that we're solving. As a manager, the number one thing that you can do to help grow your team is to coach them. But as a manager, you're spinning multiple plates. You could be at any given time onboarding, interviewing, urgent action items, internal meetings, deal reviews, training and coaching as well. But regardless, you're very busy and time is your greatest asset, but it gets sucked away in different directions. And what happens is coaching, because that's not a KPI you get measured on, because that is not something that you have to do as part of your KPIs, it gets dropped to tomorrow. And what that means is that sellers in your team aren't developing, they're not growing. We solve that. We have a bank of expert sales coaches. We match the coach to the individual based on the way in which they like to be coached, their personality, but also the business goals and objectives and their skills, knowledge, and confidence gaps. That coach then works them on demand on a regular cadence to help coach them, help them fulfill their potential, but more importantly, as well, exceed the company targets that set of them. That's what my sales coach does.
Got it. Is there a certain size or stage of company that you guys tend to work with more than others, or is it pretty universal?
So the problem is universal, right? Like lack of sales coaching. It's something like 75% of organizations rate coaching as a manager's number one priority, but managers spend less than 5% of their time doing it. We have sweet spots. We have sweet spots where sales teams up to 50 to 100, but the problem is universal. We're working with household SaaS names and we're working with SaaS companies that we never would have heard of, but the problem's universal.
Got it. Awesome. Love to talk to you a little bit about your background, how you ended up starting into sales coaching. So talk to us a little bit about how you entered the sales world through marketing, getting a few of those early jobs under your belt. So we get a lot of like sales and marketing experts on here, and so a lot of them have very like different stories in terms of how they ended up in this space. Very few of them, ever thought that they would end up in this space, and they kind of happen by happenstance land into it. But are you somebody who also coincidentally landed into this space, or is it something that you knew out the gate at a very young age that this was something you were interested in?
I wouldn't say out of the gate I was interested. Quite the opposite, actually. This isn't that exciting. Like I think a lot of people will resonate with this story. I saw sales as a dirty word. I saw it as a job that you did because you couldn't do anything else. And from a young age, my friends would say to me, "You should be in sales." They would say things like "gift of the gab," "sell snow to Eskimos," and I always found that quite insulting. I never enjoyed having those phrases attached to me because I didn't feel like that's what I was doing, and I felt like I was displaying better skills than that. So I actively pushed away from that. I enjoyed marketing, studied that at university, and did really well. I got the highest marks on the course at the university for marketing. Started to apply for marketing roles, and they were all sales jobs, but they were wrapped in the skin of a marketing role. So I really pushed back, didn't interview for sales roles. I got a job as a marketing exec, really enjoyed it. It was a startup SaaS company. The phone never rung. No one ever downloaded any collateral. No one booked a demo. And I started to see that change from the phone was ringing every day. People were signing up to newsletters, downloading collateral. And what I was seeing was my colleague who I work with today. We've worked at different companies together, but I was seeing my colleague Rich, who was back then it wasn't called SDR, but he was an SDR, picking up the phone, answering inbounds or following up leads that marketing had generated and booking meetings. And he was putting those meetings on the board and he was getting £25 for every single one. And he was getting a percentage of every deal that closed. And I thought to myself, what's going on here? Like I'm the one generating these leads. He's just picking up the phone and making money. I want to make more money. So I spoke to my boss at the time and said, can I get some commission on the leads that I'm generating? And it was very black and white. If you want commission, you work in sales. Funny enough, I think you could work in sales. Would you like to give it a go? Said no. He said, well, why don't we do a project? Why don't you market an event in London, but you sell the tickets and you get a commission on the tickets that you sell? So I did that. I put on an event in London. I sold something like 50 tickets. I made something like £2,000 commission. Very young boy, really, really pleased. And we started doing more events. I started selling more tickets. And then I just started slowly but surely SDRing. And before I knew it, I woke up one day, I was an SDR and I never looked back. And that is how I got into sales. So it was money motivated, a conscious choice, but a slow one that took a lot of convincing to do.
Yeah. What was that like when you first kind of trial by fire got into that sales game of like selling 75 tickets? And what do you think about your innate ability made it stand out, where obviously somebody else saw it in you before you saw it in yourself? But like, what if you're looking back in hindsight, like what traits did you have that made you accelerate at that versus other people who would be, probably dumbfounded in terms of feeling super uncomfortable about it?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things. It's hard to talk about this without sounding like you're bragging. I think that's just the Britishness in me. But I think first of all, just drive and work ethic. I feel like confidently I could look anyone in the eye and say, since I've started working over the last sort of 15 plus years, I've worked hard every day. I've always just had that, and that comes from my dad. My dad, it was never good enough. I would always try and get his approval. Every school report, even though it was, they were good reports, it was never good enough. There was
Mhm.
always a problem that could be fixed and worked on. And then just a need to sort of, he was very successful. I wanted to prove to him that I could follow in his footsteps, totally different careers, but I was trying to be successful. So I think drive and work rate and commitment to being successful. I would say the next thing that was really important, and I learned this in an early job, was the ability to change how I communicated depending on who I was speaking to. So I had a job at you'd call it a soccer club, we'd call it a football club, but they were a Premier League side, so that's the top league in England. And I was an apprentice there. But here's the thing that's really unique about a soccer club, so to speak, is it actually comprises of lots of different businesses. You've
Mm.
got a ticketing business, you've got a marketing business, you've got a hospitality business, you've got an account management business, you've got a PR business, you've got fans and customers. You've then got football players that earn $50,000 a week back then, like every week, $50,000 plus bonuses. Um, the playing staff, the actual manager of the team was my childhood hero. I had shirts with his name on the back, posters of him on my wall. So that was really surreal. And you think every day I had to speak to these different people at different levels, from fans to my childhood hero, megastar football players, customers, media, conference and banqueting, ticketing. So I had to adapt how I spoke to different people. And I think that was really helpful in sales, to be able to almost play the role of
Mm.
someone above my age. Because I think one of the things I see people struggle with when they start out in sales is imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
self-limiting beliefs, anxiety on speaking to senior people. But I'd had a year and a half doing that and felt comfortable having those conversations with different people on different salaries and job titles. So I think those were some of the key things.
Got it. That makes a ton of sense. Um, awesome. And then walk us through kind of like how you went through these more like different types of sales roles, growing from SDR to, more of like an AE, more in an executive role. At which point though did you feel like because sales can be like a very like isolating role, right? Like it's about individual performance and contributions a lot of the time. And to do that versus being a coach or being a leader is it's a jump in skill sets, right? It's like there is a different type of skill set required. Every leader we've had on this show, from sales to marketing to HR to AI, data, whatever, or security, like they have to have a jump in personal skill sets in order for them to become a leader in whatever that world is. What were some of those things that you realized? At what point did you know what those things were for you? And was it a conscious effort to work on those skills so that you could make the leap into either senior leadership or becoming a coach?
Yeah. So I think you're spot on in terms of how you describe it. Being an individual contributor, you're an individual, and it's about you and your target. When you become a manager, actually, you're the least important person.
Yeah.
It's about the team. It's about making them successful. That wasn't easy. And I wouldn't say it's easy today. You know what I mean? Like that is something you're constantly working on. I've been in a leadership role to an extent for like 8 years. But that the start of those 8 years were kind of very soft, team leader, you sort of really first line of reporting. I would say I've only really been a proper manager for maybe 4 years. And I think one is maturity, like you mature as a person. I think becoming a parent helps because again, you develop insane patience when you've got kids.
Mhm.
I've got a couple of those now. Um, I think it's having a coach as well and like learning from your mistakes. So one of the things I always try to do is set expectations with people that I manage. Like day one, I have a meeting with them called the expectation meeting. And that's where I tell them what I expect of them. But I want to know what they expect of me. And I point out in that meeting my flaws. So my flaws can be very direct. My flaws can be, particularly in a remote setting, I can forget to check in. Like we're remote, you don't see people. It's hard to remember to drop someone a message. How you doing? How's your
Yeah.
day? Like that's important, right? Like these are people that you work with. Um, Time management can be poor. I don't manage my own time. Like so, my calendar is basically at the mercy of SDRs and anyone internally that wants to book time with me, and that can have knock-on effects. So I try to point out my flaw, and I'm not always right. That's the other thing. I'm learning as well. So I always say, look, I'm not right all the time. When you think I'm wrong, tell me. I try to create that environment. So in terms of that step, it was, as I say, maturing. I think in life, personally, professionally, I think it is setting those expectations. I took a self-assessment. So there's an assessment that has looked at 2.4 million sales professionals, and it compares you to them. And it's like a 45-page report and shows exactly where your strengths and weaknesses are. That was very highlighting to me in terms of what I need to work on. And then as I said, I've had a coach. I've actually got two coaches that are external from the business. So one coach has been a CRO for about 20 years. Another coach has been a COO for a similar amount of time. And
Mm.
these are people that have just walked in my shoes before, had success that I want to have. And I can speak to them off the records, private conversations, show them what I'm working on. And here's what they do. They encourage and motivate me, of course, but they also challenge me. They call out maybe mistakes that I'm making or could walk into. They call out self-limiting beliefs. And ultimately, they hold me accountable to what I'm trying to work on. And a lot of coaching sessions, I dread them. I think, oh God, I'm going to get beaten up again. But that is where you grow because they have made those mistakes before. And then the other thing is, I've always made sure I surround myself with people that have what I want and are going where I want to go. And that was a realization. At one point in my career, felt like I could leave behind certain people. Like, I've worked with them before. We've had that success. Time to move on. And then I was listening to a podcast and it said, you should surround yourself with people, as I just said, that have been where you want to go, got what you want, achieved what you want to achieve. And I started working with those people again. And again, it's just they like that those mentor figures. So yeah, long answer there, but lots of different parts have played their part, so to speak.
Got it. Um, what would you say are like the top three, like how, when you're coming in and you're working with a company, do you have like, I know everybody's going to have their own different set of like strengths and weaknesses, but how do you do an audit of what those things are.
So just to understand the question, is this when you like inherit a sales team? Is that
Yeah.
what you're asking?
Yeah.
So I think when you inherit a sales team, the first thing you've got to do is observe. You've got to spend the time observing the team. How do they go about their day-to-day activities? What are their calendars looking like? What do their sales conversations sound like? So I like to consume a lot of call recordings. So I listen to discovery calls, demos, and that's really where you get an insight into how they sell. But then it's also the backstage selling. What are they doing between those meetings to ensure they're setting themselves up for success? Do they understand what's required of them to be successful in the role? Do they have their own cookbook, so to speak? Um, so that's what I would say the first thing you've got to do when you inherit a sales stage. You've got to observe and take your time there. It's then about assessing the team. I do believe having an assessment of the team is really impactful because you then take away the subjective opinions that you form and you have data. And that data lets you see exactly where the team are at, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities to improve. And that does a few things. One, it helps you to help them because this isn't opinion anymore. This is fact. This is what we need to work on. And you need to understand their motivations and align their motivations to what they need to work on. You then have a benchmark. So when you're recruiting, are you adding to the quality or are you bringing in someone subpar, which you don't want to do? And then, as I say, you create those coaching plans to work with them to get them to the level they need to be to hit their goal and fulfill their potential.
Yeah. And what do you, I mean, let's kind of dig into a little bit more of the weeds here, but, I think so the sales landscape, at least in our conversations here, we've noticed a pretty big shift, at least in the States, in terms of, higher interest rates, increased cost of capital, uh, which is impacting, I think, like longer sales cycles, people being much more, conscientious around what they are buying. And then multiple stakeholders that weren't traditionally there before, like including a CFO as part of those conversations. What have you noticed in terms of the change in the landscape from maybe the different cycles of from when you started off to maybe more recently of what's become more of a priority for the skill sets to highlight in a great salesperson?
Yeah. So there's a few questions there. I think so. First of all, I started my career when the great credit crunch happened, where
Yeah,
the banks collapsed. So and that really took a long time to recover. I feel like, and now post COVID, and then the Silicon Valley Bank going down, I feel like in look, I mean, a 15-year-ish career, so to speak, I've had three sort of economical disasters that have impacted the landscape. So maybe this is a little bit of a victim mentality, but I've always felt like it's quite tough to sell. I've always felt like that. I really feel like there's only been a couple of years where it's been okay. In terms of what I see differently, you're right, the CFO gets involved, but they've always been involved. They just never wanted to speak to you. Right now, they want to speak to you because they want to ask certain questions and they want to build the business case themselves. But also because the buyer doesn't want to make a decision on their own anymore. They really, if they're going to spend money, they want to be really comfortable that actually, if it goes wrong, they can point the finger at everybody. Well, we all agree to this. So I think the big changes beyond that is consolidation. I think people are trying to get more technology to do more things rather than having, I think the average a couple of years ago was like 21 things you had to log into as a sales rep. Just too much. And you see lots of technology now gobbling up other technology, trying to offer more. So I think you see that consolidation. You see people reviewing their tech stack. You see people not wanting to commit to maybe longer contracts. Negotiations maybe a little bit trickier. But on the whole, I feel like it's just as tough now as what it was in 2008, as what it was during COVID, as what it was, as I say, when Silicon Valley Bank went down. It all comes down to the same thing, though. As a seller, you've got to work that out. And this took me too long. It took me too long to realize where you spend your time directly relates to your results. I know it sounds really stupid, but I would spend my time in hope hope that if we keep speaking, hope that if I'm, super nice to them, hope if I give them what they want, they'll buy. Actually, it's being more ruthless with your time. It's figuring out, have they got a problem that they're motivated to solve? There's consequences if they don't solve it. And can the business buy into that business case? If they can, budget's never a problem. But if the problem isn't big enough, or the business case isn't strong enough, or you can't get to power, budget's always a problem and decisions are always a problem. It's about being smarter with where you spend your time and disconnecting from the outcome and almost being like, a seeking missile for spending your time in the right places. And if you do that, and that's about having a super tight ICP, really compelling offering, and then the ability to sell effectively. And by sell, it's helping people buy. It's not convincing anyone of anything, right? That doesn't work. And that's why I think gift of the gab, snow to Eskimos used to wind me up. If you're selling snow to Eskimos, you're a crook. They don't need it, right? If you've got the gift of the gab, that means you're convincing people. That's not what you do. As a salesperson, it's, look, I speak to people like you and they've got this problem. Have you got that problem? If you have, let's learn all about that problem. What's the impact of that problem? What have you tried? Why hasn't that worked? Are you still motivated to solve that problem? If you don't, what happens? If you do, what happens? Personally and professionally, does everyone else agree with this? If they agree with this, let's have that conversation. Let's put a business case together. Let's get sign off. And that's how the best deals are won. When you're pushing rocks uphill, when you're convincing people, when you're chasing and pushing and begging and whatnot, that's when, yeah, okay, you might get some deals, but they'll quickly churn and they won't come back. And it's really painful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And do you see or do you think anything shifting in the way that you build trust with prospects or with potential customers? I think part of the conversation here is that we, the idea of SaaS, the cloud, some of these new technologies is fairly young, right? Like it wasn't a conversation. It wasn't something that was bombarding people in terms of trying to get their attention as to you need to be solving for this. But in terms of scalability, as tech has evolved, there's a lot more. There's it's like a gold rush. Like it's like the people crowd towards it, and then it starts creating a lot of traffic. It starts creating a lot of noise, and it starts to become difficult for a customer to differentiate what like you mentioned like how you should sell, but it's like almost sometimes difficult for how even a customer is evaluating and prioritizing specific problems, right? Like because there's so many things that's going on. There's so many, it's such a changing landscape in real time. And how do you think about that, right? In terms of not just understanding that they're dealing with that specific problem, but how do you help them understand the priority of it as it relates back to their day-to-day, right? Because I think that's something that a lot of sales reps miss is like they might have a perfect solution, but it's like it's only solving for like 5% of the problems of what your customer's dealing with day in, day out. And then
Yeah.
95% of it, and it's obviously 100% of your problem as a sales rep to try to get them convinced this is sometimes a bigger deal, but sometimes maybe it's just that 5%, but making sure that how does that help them unlock something in that front?
Yeah. So I feel like the gist of the question I'm getting here, I think, let me summarize my thoughts. But first of all, the biggest problem that I see sellers have is they don't truly understand the person they're selling to. And here's what I mean by that. If I think back to my own career, I have sold to HR managers. I've never done an HR job in my life. The only time I've spoken with HR people is when I'm getting told off, right? I don't understand that world or that role. I've sold to hotel managers. I don't know anything about running a hotel. I've sold to marketing managers. I got it a little bit. I did a degree in it, but equally, they were all digital marketing managers. My degree was obsolete almost the year I completed it because it was all offline. I did one module on the internet, right? Ludicrous, really, for 2008. So I didn't understand any of those roles. And here's the thing: when you don't understand their world, we can't talk about it. So what you do is you talk about yourself and your world and your business and what you do. And that's where so many sellers go wrong. What they do is they showcase how much of an expert they are in that 5%, like you talk about, right? Well, our business does this, and this is why we're brilliant, and this is the feature you need, and this is why you're going to. And actually, what they're talking about, they're talking a very marketing language, a very technical language, because that's the training they've been given in-house. Here's the reality. You need to flip it. It's not about you. It's not, no one cares about your company, your brand, your products, awards that you've won, widgets that you've got. No one cares about that. What they care about is they've got this problem. If they don't fix it, the following thing's going to happen. This big bad thing's going to happen. If they do fix it, here's what's going to happen. They're going to look great, whatever awards they're going to get personally, professionally. But you need to be able to relate to them. You almost need to imagine, like, so everyone moans about their job. Everybody, right? You, me, everybody listening. What do they say when they're moaning? When they get home tonight and they're having dinner with their friend, partner, whoever they live with, and they say, "How was your day?" and they start to moan, what do they say? What language do they use? What specifically do they say that problem is? That's the language you need to speak as a salesperson. And it's about learning why that prospect goes to work. And that's where you can be seen as a trusted advisor, because I'm speaking to someone that gets it, someone that understands me and my world. They're not self-serving salespeople. And that's the biggest challenge. Too many people, understandably, of course, take jobs as SDRs, as AEs, selling to people they don't understand at all. Mm. And that's where the big breakdown comes from. And you said about trust, and that's the right word. People don't buy from people they like. I've had loads of people say to me, "Look, Mark, really enjoyed the process." I've had people say to me, "Mark, you were the better salesperson. However, we're not going to go forward. We're going to go with X, Y, and Z." And that's because they trust them more than me to get the desired outcome. And that's what it's about. People don't buy from people they like. They buy from people they trust. They buy from people they believe can solve the problem. And your job as a salesperson is to help them be comfortable making a decision. And there's 3 reasons people don't buy. One is lack of information. They do not understand enough about your product, service, offering, and how it helps, and the impact of no action versus action, etc. So it's a lack of information. Our job as a salesperson is to gather as much information as we can about the problem to then repurpose and reshare how we can solve that. The second problem, as to a reason I should say, as to why people don't buy it, they don't understand. They don't understand how what you're doing compares to what they're doing, or an alternative option. So, okay, I don't understand how what you do is better than what I do manually, or why it's better enough to justify. I don't understand how what you do compares to what they do. So there's a lack of understanding around the comparison. So there's the 2 reasons. Right? There's a third one coming, but lack of information, lack of understanding. And then the third one is lack of belief that it'll work. Okay, it sounds great. Will it really work? And as a salesperson, your job is to figure out those things. And I say that on sales calls. I'll say to people, I'll say, look, help me understand where you're at, because there's typically 1 of 3 reasons people don't buy. And I'll say, lack of information, explain what that is. Lack of understanding, explain what that is. Lack of belief. And I'll say, what about to you today? And they'll tell me, because people want to tell you the answer to that question because they feel like this person gets it. So they say, I don't understand how you compare. Well, let's break that down. I don't have enough information. Sure, what do you need? I don't believe it will work. Tell me why. And again, you're flipping it back on them and you're gathering more information so you can then repurpose and give it back to them in relation to how you can help.
Absolutely. On that note, I think that was a great way to end it. Just want to say thank you so much for sharing your insights and your time. That was super, super helpful.
No worries, Chris. Thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed it.
Of course. Thank you.